When I discover who I am, I'll be free. Ralph Ellison.
Oh, hi! Mr. Lahasky here, and today's video will be a short but very important chapter in the story of the United States. Last time, we observed how intellectual movements like the Enlightenment and Great Awakening laid important groundwork for an independence movement in the American colonies. Largely, these movements spread irrespective of British action or policy. Today's lecture, however, will take a look at Britain's actions during the early colonial era and the effects of those actions on colonial life. We will see that, while not intentional, England's approach to governing the colonies in their early years contributed to the troubles they had with those colonies in the mid-1700s. Let's start with a big question. Is autonomy a gateway to independence? Before we dive into this question, let's define autonomy. In this case, autonomy refers to society's ability to govern itself, despite being under the legal authority of another government. For example, Hong Kong, China is an autonomous region. Technically, it's part of China, but it has its own elected officials and local government. Another way you can think about autonomy is in your own life. Most high school students live by many of the rules and expectations of their parents, but they probably have given you the autonomy to make certain decisions for yourself. What classes you take, what clubs you join, or how you spend your Friday nights. Certainly, our autonomy increases as we age until we achieve total independence in adulthood. But does autonomy in societies always follow that path? Let's see what the history of colonial society can tell us. Indeed, the American colonies enjoyed a degree of autonomy as they grew in North America. This is our first big idea. During 1607 to 1754, the British policy towards its American colonies was characterized by salutary neglect. Before explicitly defining salutary neglect in historical terms, let's break it down linguistically. Salutary means respectful or beneficial. Neglect means to ignore. So, respectful ignorance? Actually, that's pretty much it. From the founding of Jamestown through 1754, Great Britain did very little to govern the colonies directly. Colonists were still considered English subjects, and theoretically they were under the jurisdiction of British law, but the Crown had no major presence enforcing those laws in the colonies. Instead, they largely left the colonies to their own devices and inclinations. In this way, the colonies experienced a lot of autonomy. As a result, they developed economic and political patterns of their own, and sometimes those patterns conflicted with the interests of the Crown. This is our second big idea. The economic result of salutary neglect was that colonists developed their own trade patterns, despite mercantilist laws passed in England. Remember, the economic system that dominated the age of exploration was known as mercantilism. In a mercantilist economy, all of a colony's trade is supposed to take place with the mother country. In this way, the mother country benefits from an inherently unequal trading relationship. England attempted to set up a mercantilist economy in the American colonies. Two British laws serve as examples. The Navigation Acts, passed in the mid-1600s, forbade the colonists from executing trade on foreign ships. This, of course, was designed to ensure that the colonies were trading exclusively with England. Another mercantilist law, the Molasses Act of 1733, placed a tax on imported sugar products. The British hoped that the additional tax would discourage the import of products like rum from the Caribbean to the colonies. Unfortunately for the British, neither of these policies achieved their intended effect. Because of salutary neglect, no one was really enforcing the Navigation Acts or collecting the molasses tax. The colonists were therefore free to do business with pretty much whomever they wanted. So they did. Colonists traded widely with Dutch merchants, French merchants, and the Caribbean. They established trade relationships that cut England out of the equation. Many colonial port cities, like Boston, grew prosperous because of these trading patterns. So you might be wondering why Britain permitted the colonies to smuggle around these laws. While Britain was not the colony's only trading partner, it did remain the colony's principal trading partner. Britain still profited from its colonies and largely decided that the trouble of tightly enforcing mercantilist policies was not worth the additional profit they would have seen. The colonists, of course, were fine with this because it provided a sense of economic freedom. But economic freedom was not the only result of salutary neglect. There were major political implications as well. This is our third big idea. Salutary neglect allowed for the emergence of democratic institutions across the British colonies, instilling a sense of self-government in colonial culture. When the colonies formed in North America, with no real presence or guidance from the British government, it was a given that they would need to establish local governments of their own. But the timing of the Enlightenment and the egalitarian nature of life on a new frontier pushed the colonists to establish a form of government different from their European forefathers: democracy. By 1754, patterns of self-government were evident in every colonial region. In New England, self-government began at Plymouth Rock, with the signing of the Mayflower Compact in 1620. Puritan communities, in conjunction with their churches, elected local leaders, and by 1644, the Massachusetts colony had a fully functioning two-house legislature, comprised of elected officials who met separately from the colony's governor. In the middle colonies, democracy emerged in Pennsylvania. William Penn established an elected assembly of 36 members that first had the power to accept or reject laws, but later achieved full legislative authority. In the South, we see evidence of democracy in the Virginia House of Burgesses, the first elected assembly in North America, established in 1619, and also in Maryland's bicameral legislature, established by Lord Baltimore in 1650. The United States was still 100 years away, but already democracy had become a part of American life, thanks to salutary neglect. And so, between the economic and political autonomy that the colonies enjoyed during the period of salutary neglect, you could almost make the argument that they were already quasi-independent from Great Britain. Problems arose, however, when circumstances in England forced them to crack down on the colonies and assert powers that had long been ignored. The Americans then had to decide how to handle a reduction in their autonomy, and that decision ultimately led to war and independence. As for our big question, whether autonomy always leads to independence is difficult to say. Perhaps we'll revisit this discussion after learning about the American independence movement. One thing is certain, though. Once a people acquire a taste for freedom, they are none too pleased to see it taken away. Next time, we'll look at the American independence movement and the road to revolution. See you then.